we got a ways to go. I think we're on. We're only like halfway through. There's 176 verses in Psalm 119.
It's about time for us to get started this evening. Surprised I'm not Doug, so have some interesting things to go over. And before we get started in the class, let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this time together and study some of your word. We hope that it will lift us up and encourage us to see more of your ways. Hope everything that we do here be in accordance with your will, and we ask you to guide us and bless us. We also ask you to be with those that are sick and hurting. Please bless them with your comforting presence and healing touch. Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Before I really got started on the lesson tonight, I started looking at some of the Christian. It was the study guide that Rayford put together. It was called Christian Evidences, and I just started reading it. It was on a computer, and surprise, you're being spied on. And because I was being spied on, or we're being spied on by our devices, I started getting, if you're interested in that, you might want to see this YouTube video. So I watched that one. If you're interested in that one, you might want to see this one over here. So that's where a lot of this material came from. It's mainly from a guy that does a channel called Expedition Bible. He lives in the area between Syria and Jordan, northeast of the Sea of Galilee. And a lot of his work is in archaeology type stuff. So that's where most of this stuff came from. So you can see on the board behind me the idea of all this is Bible evidences using external proofs. Just with that as a premise, do you have any ideas of what you think might have been an external proof of the Bible? Archaeological finds? Yes. Right. That was a part of that lesson material they put together. He actually emailed it to me. The moon and the earth are hung on nothing. That kind of thing. Anybody have any preferences, lessons that you've been through, topics that you've been through? Nothing?
Good evidence is that stars do make sound.
And every one of those have a red Doppler shift, which means they're leaving where we are. If there was a big bang, they should be coming back at some point,
Right.
but they're not.
Right.
They're leaving, and that rate that they're leaving is accelerating. So, yeah.
There's a lot of scientific evidence also that goes along with proof studies.
Right. And just because you haven't seen it proven yet doesn't mean that it wouldn't be at some point in the future. I mean, you know, you look at some of the crime shows. This wasn't a crime show thing. It was a report that I was reading. Somebody had committed a murder 60 years ago, and they went back to the bags of evidence from that murder scene. They found DNA, and through that family DNA thing, they figured out who committed the murder. Of course, he's dead now, but back then, what's DNA? You know?
Yeah.
One of the first ones that I looked at was unrelated to the YouTube stories, archaeological discoveries and accounts. One was related to the pathways of the earth. We'll get into that one in a minute. Another one was the Old Testament issue over eating pork. Of course, that was people in a desert community. They didn't have the cooking and dietary standards. They didn't have any way to preserve their foods. Pork in its nature was hazardous to their health. The Hebrew people knew it was forbidden, but they didn't know why. Another one that came to mind to me was the bubonic plague in 1347. It wiped out hundreds of millions of people. Approximately 60% of the population died from that. The fleas were a vector, and they were being shipped in, presumably accidentally on sailing ships, cargo. They didn't have any real medical technology or drugs to solve the problem. But the coastal areas of Greece, they looked back at the Old Testament idea of quarantining and how to possibly use that to resolve the plague issue. In Vienna specifically, they took heart in the commandments of the Old Testament, and people infected with the plague, they mandated that they had to be placed outside of the city in a special medical quarantine compounds. The caregivers would feed them until they either died or survived. Those that died in the homes or the streets had to be quickly removed and buried outside the city. In Venice, the ships were isolated in the port for 40 days. That's where they get the Latin term for quarantine. If you want to look at it later, Leviticus 13 describes how the people with leprosy were separated from the healthy people. 14 described how to tear down the house or dwelling of a infected person with leprosy. And Numbers chapter 5, verse 2, it says, "Command the sons of Israel that they send away from the camp every leper and everyone having a discharge, and anyone who is unclean because of touching a dead person." So that kind of hit on the first couple that I thought of, other than the path of the earth. I went ahead and looked that one up, and if you want to turn to Job chapter 26, we'll be looking at verse 7 through 10. And after that, we'll be moving over to Isaiah chapter 40. That's Job chapter 26, verses 7 through 10. It says there, "He stretches out over the north, over the void, and hangs the earth upon nothing. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent from them. He covers the face of the moon and spreads out over his cloud. He is described a circle upon the face of the water, and the boundary between light and darkness." Then in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 21 to 23. We'll see in these few verses the description of the fact that the earth has a circle in its path. And the problem for people interpreting the Bible back then was, what could that possibly mean? Because they thought that the earth was the center of the universe. And it gets worse for that definition, for people that wanted to say they thought they had a different idea. In Isaiah 40, chapter 40, verse 21 through 23, it says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like curtains, and spreads them from tent to dwell in, like a tent to dwell in. Who brings the princes to naught, and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing." In 1609, some major advances were made with glass lenses, and Galileo had an idea to play with a couple of them, and he noticed that if he played with a couple of them in the right positions, he could see things with a very pronounced magnification. By doing that and playing with that distance and fixing the focus on those, he was able to invent the first telescopes. By doing that, he was the first to see the moons of Jupiter, and everyone at the time, like I said, believed that the earth was the center of the universe, and everything in the universe orbited the earth. There were some people that took it to another odd sort of situation. Some of them put the earth at the center of the universe, with the sun orbiting the earth, with all the planets and the stars orbiting the sun, going around the earth like this. Anyway, it was very unpopular with the Catholic authorities. For Galileo to look at the moon orbiting Jupiter, he noticed that Galileo was, by training and his job was mathematics and teaching mathematics. He determined the orbital period of these moons around Jupiter. And he also determined the number of angles of degree at a particular time at night on Earth that those moons should be at a particular spot. He noticed that there was an error in his calculations, and the only way that he could fix that error was to have the Earth moving around the sun with the other planets. When he published that report, it was defined as a religious heresy. In 1617, Pope Paul V ruled that he and the cardinals were the only ones allowed to determine and interpret Scripture and the physical world. Because of the published report that Galileo produced from his studies and his observations, he was imprisoned. It was, I think they said it was basically in-home prison. He couldn't leave his house for the last 7 years of his life. But I think the thing to get from this is the beliefs of thousands apparently had to overrule the valid observations of a single person. Let's take a look at the next little evidence. It's in Exodus chapter 9. After that, we'll be moving to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus 9, verses 8 through 11. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take a handful of ashes from the kiln, and let Moses throw them towards the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. And it shall come as a fine dust all over the land of Egypt, and become boils breaking out and sores on men and beasts throughout all the land of Egypt. So they took the ashes from the kiln and stood before Pharaoh. Moses threw them towards heaven, and it became boils breaking out and sores on man and beasts. And they took ashes from the kiln, let's see, that was verse 10, and verse 11. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were upon them too, and upon all the Egyptians. Then in Exodus 12, verse 29 to 31, at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, and the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh rose up that night, he and his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where one was not dead. And he summoned Moses and Aaron by night, and said, rise up and go forth from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go and serve your Lord as you have said. And in 1898, in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a rather elaborate, I know most of the people have seen the gold artifacts and things that came with Pharaoh. This is another level of way they carved out the tomb for this Pharaoh Amenhotep II, and his son Weben Sinu. The grand entrance to this tomb, after they carved out the area, I guess, where people would go and pay reverence to the dead Pharaoh after he was done, the ceramic tiling and the painting and the stuff that was on the inside of that room, and there were 6 pillars that held the ceiling in place. Didn't get a picture of that, but the other things that are in there that relate directly to the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's first son. That whole area was discovered and documented by an archaeologist from France. His name was Victor Leray. The firstborn was found in one of the corners of the areas that seemed to be like an area of reverence for the Pharaoh, and he was the evidence is documented by the archaeologists showed the young man was an adolescent because of the way his hair was arranged. They left a patch on one side of the head and braided it. It's rather fancy looking stuff. But that individual was found dead before the Pharaoh died. But after the Pharaoh died, the interesting part that goes with that was that the whole body of the Pharaoh was covered with these small projections, tubercles. No other Pharaoh was found as a mummy in this condition. It was assumed that it could have possibly been from a salt bath, but why one individual would have that really didn't make any sense. But you can see all along the neck and presumably underneath the blanket is more of those bones. They're just everywhere.
You said that was the son?
The son is in basically what looks like a wooden coffin. He can't be viewed. But this guy, his mummy is in the Hall of the Kings in Egypt. But that's Amenhotep II. Now, there's a lot of debate, and it doesn't clearly say in the Bible that this guy died when the parted seas came back together. But undoubtedly, he had to die pretty soon, either then or shortly after, to still have the wounds from the boils. That's the debate. If he did die in the Red Sea, the Bible does say that his army was seen from the other side by the Israelites and Moses. Looking back across the sea, they could see him on the beach on the other side after they drowned. Now, whether this guy was there or not, it's debatable. He either did die there or he died shortly after. There's another one to look at. Where Esau was running from his brother. When Jacob was running from Esau. In Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 32. Genesis 32, verse 22 to 32. It describes in this section a river and a valley, actually a couple of valleys. The Jabbok River is between two mountains. On the north side of the river, there's another valley between two mountains. And Peniel or Penuel, right here, it's described in the Bible as a hilltop on the side of a mountain. And the reason that's significant is because Esau used that to get an early warning. If Jacob used it as an early warning to see Esau and his army of 200 men that was coming supposedly after him. Jacob didn't know that they weren't coming to kill him. But because of the fear, he's at this place and he's making preparations and he's dividing out his flocks and his servants and his wives and his children. He's sending other people off on other sides of the Jabbok River to hopefully survive any attack that might be coming. We'll start reading in chapter 32, verse 22. That same night he arose, took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. Now, the way the topology of the area is laid out, that ford today is a modern bridge with a modern highway that runs up the valley between the 2 mountains that are on the north side of the Jabbok. And it runs by the hill where Peniel ends up being located. It's just a ruin now, but back then it was highly traveled just because it was an easy way to travel through. Continuing on, verse 23, he took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. He was left alone, in verse 24, and he wrestled with him, and a man wrestled with him till the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and Jacob's thigh was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to them, "Then what is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name from now on shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and prevailed." And Jacob asked him, "Tell me your name." And he said, "Why is it you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. In verse 30, Jacob called the name, here my Bible says it's Peniel with an I. Throughout the Bible, you'll find it written as an I or an E. It's the same place. He called it Peniel, for I have seen the face of God, and my life was preserved. The sun rose. The sun rose upon him, and he passed Penuel, limping because of his thigh. And because of this, to this day, the Israelites will not eat the sinew of the hip that was on the hollow of the thigh, because that's where he was touched with the sinew of the hip. If you want to read later, chapter 8, Gideon visited this town after Jacob had named it. In 1 Kings chapter 12, Jeroboam went there and fortified the city walls. And we'll find in the archaeology that because of the Hebrew reverence for this place, a synagogue was built there. Like I said, today it's in ruins. I think it was chapter 8 of Judges where Gideon mentioned that you had Sukkah right here, and Peniel, and right about here was Bethel, however you want to say that, Bethel. Now today, those are just, they're all ruins. But in 1934, William Albright conducted a major archaeological investigation there, and they confirmed the biblical references, the locations of the different ruins of cities. And also there's another thing that was verified there. Can't remember what that one was. In 1837, there was also an American that dug there. Selah Merrill was the American that dug in 1877. The other item that was listed there, the city walls that Jeroboam built in 1 Kings chapter 12, they're also found at Peniel. Now, if you look at this is an odd thing that I didn't know anything about until this little review of this item came up. This is at the I just lost the word. The synagogue. The synagogue has 4 posts in the shape of a heart. I don't necessarily claim to be a historian or understand why that is. I don't understand the structural meanings for why that is. It's just the way synagogues were built back then. And the point of the heart ends up being pointed towards the individual corners. Over here. And the seat where the individual would read would be at the top of the screen in the middle. I had 2 more to do, but I think we're going to run out of time. I'll just briefly hit the one that we'll skip over. There was a dig in Babylon, and they were saying that the dig from 1899 to 1917, which was interrupted by a world war, there were 200 workers that Robert Cultivate was leading a dig he was from Germany. They took some of the most amazing stuff from Babylon, and they put it in a museum. You would not believe the staircase is a reconstructed staircase that was kind of falling apart when they found it. This was all under like 40 feet of dirt. It was really big. Now, plastic water bottles, that has nothing to do with archaeology, that's just trash. But in that little area between the wall and the staircase, there were 300 clay tablets in cuneiform that documented the food that was given to Jehoiakim, king of Judah. And his sons. In 1 Kings chapter 25, it says that on the 37th year, the exile of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, the 12th month, on the 12th day of the month of Evil-Merodach, the king of Babylon, the year he began to reign, he graciously freed Jehoiakim from prison. He spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat in the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. And Jehoiakim put off his prison garments, and every day he dined regularly at the king's table. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king every day, a portion as long as he lived. Now, just because he was no longer a prisoner, he still wasn't able to go back home. Nehemiah, I think, went back to rebuild Jerusalem, along with one of the two sons that also received food, grain, and oil. Like I said, we just briefly hit that one. What was the part? That was first, I have 2 Kings 25, verse 27 through 30. You see where he was taken prisoner in 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 8 through 17. The last one I wanted to look at before the time gets away was David's tomb. In 1 Kings chapter 2, it says David slept with his fathers, and he was buried in the city of David. In Nehemiah's chapter 17, verse 15, Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 15. And Shalom, the son of Kohazai, ruler of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate, and he rebuilt it and covered it and set its doors and bolts and bars. He built the wall of the pool of Shelah of the king's garden as far as the stairs go down from the city of David. You can see the pool marked as M. And in Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 16, after him, Nehemiah's son, Azbuk, ruler of half the district of Bethzer, repaired the point opposite the sepulchres of David to the artificial pool in the house of the mighty men. About this area right here. T1 is the most significant part of that. T1 is believed to be the tomb of David. In 1913, Raymond Wall, Jewish archaeologist, led an excavation in this area because of the Old Testament documentation that said that it was in the city of David. He dug where the Old Testament said it was, and since that time, after the fall of Jerusalem, the Romans turned this area into basically a quarry. You can see that right there is a block that's about to be released, and whatever was going on, the workers were interrupted, so they never released it, never finished pulling that piece out. But what they were doing is they were pulling the roof off of the cave that made the tomb where David was buried. It says here that just at the end of T1 of the high tunnel, the first stage remains its sarcophagus, which is where the body would have been laid. That's basically the cave. Sarcophagus would be there. Entrance would be there. And today you look at it and the top of it has been whittled away to make building materials for other buildings. At the very top you can see the sunlight coming through right in the center. That's where the roof of the entrance part of the tomb is gone. Of course, that area in the back where the hollow part is, that's where the body would have been laid. So anyway, I'm hopeful that everybody can get some confidence and be reassured that what we read in the Bible is for real. If you want to check out Expedition Bible on YouTube, I'm not advertising, I'm not being paid for them or anything. It's just an interesting thing. Most everything he has a level of encouragement built into it. So I think that's about it for tonight. As far as announcements go, there's a sign-up sheet for Jabberwocky, right, Charlie?
Yep.
Be planning for Jabberwocky on the 14th. It'll be hosted here. That's all I have for announcements. Anybody have anything I didn't know about? All right, that's it.